It's fantasy time. Once again, the regular season finale, the last time we're going to be having this usage situation for the remainder of the season. Of course, they reset the usages going into the playoffs. So we don't know what the format will look like for that as of yet for next week, but we'll find that out for next week's fantasy episode. But for now, this is the last time we're able to use these regular season usages, and we're out of a lot of the big names after last weekend at Michigan, which I came away victorious once again, 3 weeks in a row. Am I dreaming? I need to pinch myself, but I'm hopefully going to end the regular season 4 for 4 here for the last month, but I'm sure Kyle's not going to be going away quietly. So there's a lot of different things, a lot of different variables to consider, but at the end of the day, this is Daytona. It's a crapshoot. You don't know who's going to survive, and you just got to hope for the best and see if your guys make it to the end with little to no damage as possible. But lots of different things to take into consideration. You're infamous for the randomizer. We talked prior to the show. It doesn't seem like that's going to be coming out this time around.
The randomizer got retired. Don't worry.
The randomizer got retired for now, at least. We'll see what happens. But lots of different things to consider. The playoff bubble battle coming into this weekend as well, with Tyler Redick and Austin Dillon going in for that last playoff spot on points. Of course, there's a possibility for a surprise winner outside of that playoff cut line that could go in there and just knock out the RCR duo entirely, and they both don't make the playoffs. But right now, 25-point cushion, I believe, for Tyler Redick over Austin Dillon coming into Daytona. That's not insurmountable by any means if Redick has an issue early on and Dillon earns some stage points and is actually there at the finish of the race. But it's going to it's going to be a little bit of a tough task for Dillon to maybe make up that deficit on his teammate there, but should be interesting to see. We can maybe talk about that a little bit later on. But with no truck series this week, I believe you start us off, Kyle, with the first pick this week for the Daytona regular season finale.
I do. And even though it is mainly a crapshoot, I will say that I do believe that there is an element of good guesses versus bad guesses to a certain extent. There are certain drivers that have certain trends of being strong at these tracks versus others that don't. Certain drivers that are often in the wrecks versus certain drivers that are able to get through them and stuff like that. So even though it is for the most part just kind of guessing and hoping for the best, there is a certain extent of good guesses versus bad bets or whatever you want to characterize it as. So just quickly, I think we should start it off by saying who we don't have available just before we get into the picks. So for myself, unavailable for myself at 0 usages, I have Kyle Larson, Denny Hamlin, Chase Elliott, William Byron, Kyle Busch, and Joey Logano. I don't know if you have it on hand quickly, if you want to relay who you don't have available for yourself this weekend.
Yeah. So for me, I don't have Kyle Larson, Denny Hamlin, Chase Elliott, Kyle Busch, or Martin Truex Jr. at my disposal for my lineup. So they are no-goes for me this weekend. And honestly, I'm pretty happy with that. I made the decision last week to decide between either William Byron or Denny Hamlin for my lineup this week for the Daytona race. I leaned with William Byron. Probably could have gone the other way last week with Byron finishing second, but overall, I'm still pretty happy at the end of the day with what I've got going into this weekend.
Alrighty, I'll lead things off, and I'll start with Ryan Blaney here. The Daytona results have been a bit up and down.
Congrats to him on his Michigan win as well. I just want to point that out. That was a pretty impressive win.
Yep. If I didn't have to worry about the damn usages, I would have had a perfect 6 for 6 lineup. But regardless, Ryan Blaney has a couple of very strong results at Daytona looking to 2020, got caught up in the big crash early on in the Daytona 500 earlier this year. And we know about his prowess at Talladega. I do think it's important to distinguish the differences between Talladega and Daytona. They're the same format, but just like any mile and a half or short track or anything like that, they're very different in terms of how you race them. You've got a lot more width to work with Talladega. You can send things 4 wide and don't worry about it. At Daytona, you send it 4 wide, you're probably ending up in the fence. stuff like that. So I think it's important to note that distinction. But for Ryan Blaney, I believe in the Penske power. I believe in his abilities as a super speedway racer. The Daytona results last year were both very, very impressive. This year didn't get a chance to show it because of the big wreck early on. I've got 2 usages left, so obviously the usages don't matter at this point. So somebody that I didn't end up using as much as I thought I would over the season. So very happy to kind of have him as my leadoff guy here at Daytona.
I'm matching you. I'm Ryan Blaney.
Okay.
I got 1 usage left on the 12
car.
That
guy who matches at Daytona, but okay.
Can you blame me though? Ryan Blaney's pretty damn good super speedway racer, man. While he may get involved in some of the wrecks, he does end up in victory lane sometimes as well. And he's a guy that likes to win by the slimmest of margins. I think there was a graphic that came out on social media this week that showed like his differences in terms of the margin of victory. I think the most was 2 seconds and the rest of them were like almost under like 0.2 of a second. It was nuts. But if he's going to get another victory this season, his third victory of the season, it's probably going to be by another close margin here once again at Daytona. But I like him. I like Penske at the super speedway tracks. I like Ford as overall as a manufacturer. They are by far the best at this, in my opinion, in terms of getting the results at the super speedways overall. But yeah, Ryan Blaney's a no-brainer for me this weekend to put into my lineup. I go again here for the second pick, and I'm not going to, beat around the bush here. I'm going to go with William Byron. This is a guy I saved last weekend. We'll see what happens with the 24 car this weekend. Obviously, it's a crapshoot. Who knows what's going to happen? He could get involved on a wreck on lap 1, but hopefully that doesn't happen for my lineup. I would like to have as many options later on in the race as possible. But for William Byron, he's starting second. Hendrick is pretty good on when they work together. Saying that though, when they do work together, they usually get involved in that same wreck, all 4 cars. So hopefully that William Byron avoids the wreckage. Of course, the defending race winner here at Daytona as well. Not in the position he was last season where it was a win almost and you're in. He's obviously clinched into the playoffs with his win at Homestead in the 3rd race of the season, but he's been spectacularly consistent this season and started to turn the corner last weekend at Michigan. I waited to see what would happen. And now I see that, he put a finish together. It was a little bit of a tough stretch there after being so consistent for that about 2/3 mark, 1/3 mark of the season. They were really, really consistent there with consecutive top 10 finishes. They've turned the corner here, I think, after Michigan. We'll see what happens at Daytona, but I think you could get some stage points and maybe be there at the end of the race as well.
Yeah, and the Hendrick power is always very, very strong at super speedways, and speed matters least of all at the super speedways, but having the fastest cars does usually result you being at the front, and that shows with William Byron. Just last year, he had one of the fastest cars in the field in the regular season finale, was up at the front, got some stage points, and ultimately ended up with that first career victory. Don't have him at my disposal this weekend, but I will have Hendrick power in my lineup in the form of Alex Bowman. Hasn't had the high-end results at Daytona just yet in his career, but a little bit surprisingly to me, over the last 6 Daytona races, he actually ranks as the 7th most points, has been a consistent guy in terms of being in that top 10 conversation, has 2 top 10s over the last 6 races at Daytona. At the 500, had the trouble early on, as did a lot of people, so didn't get to show that true pace that car and that team had. But I like the consistency overall for Bowman. I wanted a Hendrick car in my lineup, and having used everybody else, Bowman was the guy that I ended up having at my disposal. So he is my second entry to the lineup. Number 3 here. I'll go with a bit of a swing on this one. Somebody outside the playoff battle, somebody that needs to win and get into the situation or needs to win to get into the playoffs, that situation that a lot of drivers find themselves in. But I like the team. I like the speed they showed earlier this season, and I like the driver at super speedways. It's Bubba Wallace in my lineup. Toyota.
Okay, I'm not surprised.
Toyota is a team that is a bit difficult to bet on at super speedways, because if there are longer green flag runs and they do need to pit on a green flag cycle, you look at the amount of Fords, you look at the amount of Chevys, and then you look at the amount of Toyotas. For some reason, Toyota always decides to pit by themselves, or they don't have time to react to other people pitting in time, stuff like that. Whatever the case may be, they usually are on the short end of things after a pit cycle. And we saw that at the Daytona 500, where they ended up getting strewn out. Denny Hamlin didn't have a chance to go for the victory because of that. Bubba Wallace ended up a lap down. A lot of stuff happened in that situation. But overall, I really like Bubba Wallace and his talents at super speedways. He's been in the conversation for top fives and wins with Richard Petty Motorsports. I believe in the 2311 speed at the super speedways. I believe also in Toyota. Everybody else that essentially is a Toyota team, I'm excluding the 96, even though it is great to see Landon Castle get back in the Cup Series this weekend. All the JGR cars are in the playoffs. So when you're looking at manufacturers, there's a lot of Fords that aren't in. There's a lot of Chevys that aren't in. There's one Toyota that isn't in. So if there's a team kind of element to this, all the Toyotas will be working towards Bubba Wallace getting into the playoffs. So I like everything that's shaping up in that regard. So Bubba Wallace is my number 3 entry to my lineup here.
Okay. Bubba Wallace scares me a little bit, but I have him tentatively in my lineup right now. He does, it's just such a frantic finish to this regular season. Daytona, a lot of emotions, lots of pressure for these guys outside the playoffs, that they tend to do some over aggressive things at times to try and get themselves in a situation.
Yep.
And usually those things end up going poorly for the people that are in those desperate situations. So I'll wait a bit on Bubba Wallace. I'll see what happens a little bit later down the line in this, but 100% a guy that I'm going with is a guy I have one usage left on. It's Joey Logano. He's one of the best super speedway racers out here. That's plain and simple. He's proven that numerous times. He's either causing the wreck, being in the wreck, or in victory lane. There's no other way about it. That's the 3 ways for Joey Logano to really get into the contention here. Less so of late with starting the wrecks, I'd say, over the last 1 or 2 seasons. Before that, he was just a menace on these super speedways where he would just go too aggressive. But I think he's one of the best at earning stage points. He's unbelievable at that at super speedways. When the Penske cars get lined up and the Fords get lined up, he's usually the one at the front of the field getting those stage points and even stage victories. So I feel good about the early portion of the race for Logano, starting 22nd. So we're going to have to come through the field, but 22, starting 22. I like that kind of combination there. Joey Logano is 100% in my lineup. He may not be there at the finish. He may be end up on the hauler, getting towed off of the track, but I'll still take Logano for the early portion of the race to try and get those stage points established so that at least he may have like a 30-point day, which is still pretty good by super speedway standards. But my next guy, I'm going back to the Ford camp with this one. Matt Davidetto is in my lineup. Yeah, I'm going to put him in there. This is a guy that has shown glimpses on the super speedways. He's been so close so many times. Margin of victory is less than like a thousandth of a second. Basically, he's ridiculous. 100th of a second. He's ridiculous at how close he comes to victories here for his first Cup Series victory. I don't know if he gets that this weekend, but he's going to have to put himself in the best position possible. He's out there to prove himself. He needs to win a race to try and solidify himself for some sort of ride next season, wherever that may be. Maybe he makes the playoffs and does that here at Daytona. He's going to have the Ford power underneath him under the hood. And I think that could be just quite what they need for Matt Davidetto to maybe get a solid finish at the end of this one. He usually finds trouble at these super speedways, maybe at Daytona more so than Talladega, but I'll still bet on Matt Davidetto here to get me solid finish.
Alrighty, going with a couple of Penske powers on that one. Well, I'll continue the trend because I've got Brad Keselowski in my lineup. Kind of similar in thinking to what you've got there with Joey Logano in terms of somebody that's up at the front, get some stage points, stuff like that. We saw Keselowski get the super speedway win earlier this season. He's been in a lot of wrecks at Daytona recently.
Yeah.
So this is more of a swing here, but I like the addition of TJ Majors there. Interested to see how things go with TJ Majors and Coleman Presley and stuff like that this weekend between the two. But I like Penske being up at the front. Keselowski gets those stage points if he isn't wrecked before that. And so because of that, with the usages and everything like that, I didn't even come close to using him up this year with the bad luck that I had with him.
How many do you have left with Keselowski?
I ended up having 5 left, I think.
Same. Yeah.
Five left. So
yeah, we didn't use him at all.
No. So for Keselowski, he often ended up being the number 6 guy when we did have him in our lineup. So we had him in often, but usually ended up in the garage. But anyways, for Daytona here, like the prowess on super speedways, like the win earlier this year at Talladega, he was up there at the front in the 500, of course, before the chaos ensued.
So close.
Yes. So hoping that some of that translates to some good stage points and a decent finish here, but we'll see how things go. But Penske being up at the front, betting on them for some stage points and getting kind of that safe bet there between Blaney and Keselowski. So for that, that's 4 entries for myself. Number 5. And I'll go with one that maybe you wouldn't anticipate necessarily. Going for a bit of a safer one, but their form at the 500 was really, really impressive to me. They need to try and get some kind of playoff points with the situation that they're in. And I'm actually looking at Kevin Harvick this weekend. He's had some good results in the past at Daytona. Recently has been a little bit lower, but in the 500, both this year and the year previous, had some really solid top 10 runs, and especially this past year with a really good finish. So I don't really know what the strategy is going to be. Knowing Harvick, I would maybe expect them to be a little more conservative throughout this race and maybe try to be there at the end. But I think overall, having a veteran in there, I like the forward power and stuff like that. So for Harvick here, I again wasn't expecting to have him available for me in the last race of the season going into this year, but with how things ended up working out, I actually had a couple of usages left for him here. So Kevin Harvick, he's going to be in my lineup here as maybe a bit of a safer candidate who I expect to be there in the conversation by the end of the race.
Okay. Interesting. I saw his name floated around a little bit for some fantasy stuff that I was looking at prior to the episode. And it was an interesting kind of take on Kevin Harvick. You wouldn't really think of him as a super speedway racer necessarily, but back in his RCR days, he was actually pretty solid. Of course, a 2007 Daytona 500 winner, and was very close in that photo finish back in the day at Talladega, where I believe he won. I think he beat Clint Boyer that day with that damaged Realtree car. But yeah, he's been underrated at times, been close. We'll see if he can maybe finish the deal and seal the deal here for you this week, and go with some bigger names than I thought you might for the first 5 selections. We'll see what you got for your 6th one. These last 2, man, these
5
are
and
tough.
6, round it out.
These are tough.
So far, the only similarity we have is Ryan Blaney. So I'd like to keep it as different as possible, but do whatever you think is best for your chances of winning, because you need the help.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. You know, this name keeps on standing out to me, and I think you'll like it. Chris Buescher in the lineup. Okay. He's an interesting one. He's an interesting super speedway racer. Roush usually brings their better stuff to the super speedway tracks. I could see him maybe getting some kind of good points. Maybe he'll be there at the finish of this one. That's what these guys need to do. They can't be going for stage points. They need to try and be there at the finish of the race. We'll see what kind of approach a lot of these playoff guys or outside the playoff guys take when it comes through stages and into the latter stages of the race, if they are not involved in that big one yet. But I'll go with Chris Buescher. I didn't initially have him in here, but the more I look at it, I'm like, okay, I can get behind this and see what I can get done with Chris Buescher. He's got some decent numbers here at Daytona, got one of the better average finishes as well. So we'll see what happens with the 17 car.
Final pick.
Yeah.
Final pick.
Yeah. You know what? I am going to match you on Bubba Wallace.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Because when I look at the other options, I think that they're going to bring more speed than some of these other guys. And at the end of the day, I really want to try and get some stage points if I can. And I think they'll be aggressive enough to try and find out what that car has in store. Bubba Wallace doesn't really seem like the kind of guy or kind of driver that would take it easy in the early part of the race. He's usually pretty aggressive, and we saw that in the 500. I'm a little bit nervous about it. I think he could honestly start a wreck or something like that this weekend, being a little bit too over aggressive to maybe get that victory to get him into the playoffs. The pressure's on him just from social media and from the media, or just internal pressure that he puts on himself unnecessarily, I might add, because this is their first season. I didn't really think they would need to go out there and win a race, but you never know. Bubba Wallace is very, ambitious, and he's got a lot of emotion to him, which is a good thing at times. So I'll go with Bubba Wallace to round out my lineup for the regular season finale.
I'm a little bit surprised that my final pick here was not in your lineup, because looking at the stats, obviously the number one at Daytona by a decent margin as well in terms of average points is Denny Hamlin over the last 6 races, an average of 33 per Daytona race, which normally would be on the lower end of things. But at Daytona, that's an insane number. 3 straight, very strong finishes.
Yeah.
The number 2 guy, though, has been left untaken, and I will gladly take him. Your reigning Daytona 500 winner, Michael McDowell, always up at the front, getting some stage points in the conversation, seems to get through wrecks with a lot of consistency. He's always there at the end of the race, and coming off of their success at the 500, needing to go out and try to get any kind of playoff points that they can possibly get, to kind of help put a buffer on if other guys in the playoffs have some issues, trying to get as close to that playoff round of 12 as they possibly can. Michael McDowell, I think he's going to be up in the conversation in the stages. He always finds his way to the end of these races. So I will gladly take him as my final entry here to my lineup.
Yeah, I had him written down before the show in my lineup, but I just think I've just seen it too many times with the 500 winner, you think that they're going to do it again. And they don't. They just get involved in a wreck, and it's just unfortunate.
I'm not
kind
predicting
of thing.
him to win.
No, but I'm not saying that, but I do think luck runs out eventually. And I think he's had quite a bit of luck on these super speedway tracks. And I think that maybe this is the Daytona where he just can't quite avoid it. This is just an unparalleled beast of what this track and what this race represents for a lot of guys. And he's not going to be as aggressive.
I actually am glad that you brought that up. The who does good in the 500, how well do they do in the race later in the season, because I have some of the numbers up here. So I just looked this up and found it interesting. So last year, between the 500 and then the regular season finale, there was only 3 drivers that finished in the top 10 in both: Denny Hamlin, Chris Buescher, and Ryan Blaney. So I thought that's a bit of an interesting one as a precursor going into this weekend.
Yeah, that's just from my thinking back to it.
Yeah. It's something that I had. Obviously, it's something that you subconsciously think about, just given the kind of luck aspect of Daytona and stuff like that, but isn't something that I'd quantified at all. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, there's just some.
Also find it interesting that neither of us have Austin Dillon or Tyler Redick in our lineup.
I'm not interested in that at all. I think that that's pretty cut and dry. I would not, we'll get to it here. We'll get, but let's just go right into the honorable mentions and the stay away from. This is a bit of an interesting one on the super speedways. Are we going to
do 80% of the field like we usually do for super speedways?
It is really tough for me to narrow it down because when I look at the names,
here we go. Buckle in, everybody.
Get the popcorn. This could be a while. But there is some interesting names on here that I think that if we didn't have the usage problem, namely Denny Hamlin. That's the first one I'm going to start off with. If you have a usage left on the 11 car, obviously use him this week. He's probably the best super speedway racer in the series right now. And he's got one of the faster cars usually as well at specifically Daytona, more so than Talladega. So he's 100% would be in my lineup if I had a usage left on him, but I don't. But if you do, I would definitely recommend using him this weekend. Brad Keselowski makes an appearance on this list as well. I know he's been kind of hit or miss on Daytona specifically, but he's a really good super speedway racer overall. And I think that applies no matter where you go. Bad luck has been on his side. He was involved in a lot of those July 4th weekends when Daytona was around there in those wrecks specifically. Won a Daytona race back in, I believe 2014 or something like that. I want to say in the summer race, that was his only Daytona victory. But this is one of, he has not won on he's not won on a track other than a super speedway race this season. So maybe he gets his second victory of the season as well on a super speedway. Kevin Harvick surprisingly does make an appearance on the honorable mentions. I wasn't thinking about that really going into this weekend, but he's a guy that just kind of stays steady and somehow avoids the wrecks at times and somehow is really involved in the wrecks. So We'll see what kind of version we get of Kevin Harvick's luck this weekend, but an interesting name. I'm glad you put him in your lineup just so I can keep an eye on him a little bit more, have more of an interest in what Kevin Harvick does this weekend.
Cheer against them is what you're trying to say? Essentially.
But nonetheless, I think Harvick's an interesting name for fantasy this weekend. I'm a little bit surprised, but not that surprised that we don't have Ricky Stenhouse Jr. in either of our lineups this week. And this is a guy that was, pretty well known for his super speedway prowess after having those 2 victories there in his Roush Fenway days, was better out of the gate in JTG's first season. This year, however, it's been a little bit more of a decline. He's had some bad luck and was involved in the wrecks earlier on at Daytona. So he just hasn't quite materialized into the super speedway racer this season as probably what we would have liked. And he's a bit too aggressive for my liking at times. And I think that that's just what leads to them having some issues sometimes. So Ricky Stenhouse Jr., if you want to go with him this weekend, he could be a guy that goes out there and goes for the victory. Obviously this weekend, this is his best shot. Maybe he does it. He probably doesn't though. You never know. You never know with that Ricky Stenhouse Jr. character. Alex Bowman, he makes an appearance on this list. I had usage left on him. I just decided to go against it just a little bit. I like having just the 1 Hendrick car with William Byron this weekend rather than Alex Bowman, but he is very good at Daytona when it comes to getting some of the finishes sometimes. So we'll see what happens with the 48 car. Then Eric Jones is another one. I was very close to putting him in my lineup this weekend.
Really?
Yeah, I had him in the 500 lineup. And I just was trying to look at some guys that were involved in that lap 16 wreck in the 500. I was like, okay, lightning could strike twice, but I'm going to maybe see if maybe it does it this time. And Eric Jones was one of those guys that was involved in that lap 16 wreck in the 500. And I was really looking forward to seeing what he could do in that 43 car, which shows up to the super speedway track. This is their better chance to win. Eric Jones, of course, won at Daytona for Joe Gibbs Racing a couple of seasons ago as well in this race on the July 4th weekend. So I like Eric Jones this weekend. I just decided to go with guys that I think are going to go for more stage points necessarily. And Eric Jones just doesn't quite always have the luck that I would like for these super speedway tracks. But interesting note, he almost made my lineup. And last but not least, I'm going to just end it off here with Corey Lejoy. Coming back into the number 7 car this weekend after missing last weekend due to COVID. This is a guy that could potentially be there at the finish of the race. Probably won't win just based off of speed, but could get a top 10 just because of he's avoiding the wrecks and staying out of trouble very much throughout the race. Those are the guys that I kind of like to look at. I almost put Ryan Newman on this list, but has been a little bit more lesser known as of late with getting the results. So those are the honorable mentions. Do you have anybody else that you would have maybe put in there? I mean, they're all really honorable mentions really in the field this weekend, but anybody else?
Just off the top of my head, I think there's 2 guys that were in consideration for me that you didn't mention there. The first one is Austin Dillon because he does need to be up there contending for those stage points. So if you're looking for somebody that is both very risky, but also a safe bet in terms of getting those early points. So if they do wreck out in a final stage, you still have something to lean back on. Yeah. I do think he's somebody that should be in consideration for lineups, just given how good they looked at the 500 in the duels as well. I heavily considered them. And then the other one as well, which maybe is a little bit off-putting because of the aggressiveness or anything, but I really liked what I saw from them in the 500 is Ross Chastain. Again, somebody that is in that must-win scenario, but has shown very well on super speedways with Colleague Racing in the Xfinity series. Had a very, very strong 500 this year, not being too aggressive as we'd seen in the previous races for Chastain. He's kind of a strange character because we've seen him play the safe side with Premium Motorsports and get a top 10 at super speedways there. But then we also saw him with that Spire entry, which was a 3rd Chip Ganassi Racing entry the last couple of seasons, and kind of get involved in some stuff. So I like him to be involved at the front. I like him to be in the conversation, but the aggressiveness can maybe put me off a little bit, which is why I didn't end up having him.
Fair enough. Last but not least, we have the stay away froms here. Only have 3 really, but 2 specifically. It's really hard to pinpoint a stay away from at the super speedways. Some of them are a little bit more obvious than others, but given people's usage situation, I didn't want to put the likes of like a Chase Elliott or a Kyle Larson on this list just because you probably don't have the usages anyways. But
if you had them, I'd put them in actually.
You would?
Yeah, the Kyle Larson ranks as the third best average points over the last 6 Daytona races. Chase Elliott fourth.
Yeah,
so
they're both solid.
When you factor in the Hendrick power as well, I'd absolutely have them in if you had the usage at your disposal.
I just imagine that they wouldn't. So I'll just, so if you do want to go with some of these guys that we don't have usages on it, and I didn't mention, maybe you want to take a swing on them if you do have one usage left on these guys. But I'd be curious to know why you would have saved it for Daytona if you were planning to do that. But nonetheless, stay away from. I'm going with the two guys that are on the bubble. Tyler Redick and Austin Dillon are in the stay away from for me this weekend, just because of how risky they are. It's just too much behind that. There's a lot of intensity that goes with that bubble spot, and it usually leads to more wrecks than not. And Austin Dillon is a guy that we've seen start wrecks. He won the Daytona 500 by turning Eric Almirola. He's not afraid to do something in order to get that race. He did win the race, but I do think
I wouldn't necessarily say that's a bad thing in that respect.
No, but
I disagree heavily with that, but go ahead.
Okay. When you get a little bit too overeager at times on these super speedway tracks, you give that little bit of extra push that you wouldn't normally do. Bad things tend to happen. I think Austin Dillon is going to be in a position where he's going to have to do that extra little move, and it could go bad for him and the rest of the competition around him in the big one. I do think he's a good super speedway racer overall, but something about this playoff pressure adds to that animosity a little bit, and adds to the tension that builds in the regular season finale, that you need to try and beat your teammate of all people to make the playoffs. I think that there's just a little bit too much behind that. He could make a mistake. The pressure could get to him at times. I don't know. That's just my personal opinion. I just think it's just a bit too risky to go for a guy like that. He could definitely go out there and even win the race. Like, that's totally within the realm of possibility. But I think I'd lean 70% chance he ends up on the hauler with a wrecked race car at the end of the day. So, and Tyler Redick, he's not a great super speedway racer, in my opinion, at least. He started the wreck last season with Kyle Busch in the closing laps with a late block. Sure, he's probably maybe matured a little bit as a driver, but I do think he's a little bit like frantic behind the wheel at some of these super speedways. I don't like what I see when I look at the car and I look at the motion of how it moves. I think it's just a little bit too skittish for my liking to really say that Tyler Redick is a feasible option. I think there's many more options out there than Tyler Redick. I think it's very hard to get the top 10 in stage points if you're trying to rely on that. There's a couple of guys that you can definitely look at and say that you're confident in doing that, but there's basically the rest of the field could go out there and get a stage point if they put themselves in the right position. It's too risky for me to see that either of them are going to get stage points. They probably could get a couple. They could even win the stage together, but for me, those two are complete stay away froms. And then last but not least, we'll see if the curse works. Kyle Busch, a stay away from here this weekend. We'll see if he can finally get that first victory on a super speedway track since 2008. But overall, he's just absolutely one of the most unlucky guys you're ever going to see on the super speedway. So honestly, do stay away from Kyle Busch. If you have a usage, I would not put him in the lineup. He does end up leading laps, ends up wrecked more often than not. So those are the stay away froms. Those are the honorable mentions. You have something to say about Austin Dillon, though. I'd love to hear why you think the other way around.
I actually disagree with both Redick and Dillon to a certain extent. Okay. I would stay away from Redick in terms of fantasy because there's nothing for him to race for. He doesn't need to be up at the front contending or anything like that. If he just finishes the race and Dillon doesn't win or doesn't have anybody else win that is on the outs, or that basically he holds his own destiny to a certain extent. If he just finishes the race, the odds of somebody outside the playoffs winning versus somebody in the playoffs, it's more likely that somebody in the playoffs wins this race. So if they just mind their own business, stuff like that, I don't think that they'll be up there trying to get those stage points or anything like that. It's too risky for them to be in that kind of fight. What I will say is that I do think that Tyler Redick is a better super speedway racer than you give him credit for. In four out of the 6 super speedway races that he raced in the Xfinity series, finished inside the top 10, won 2 of those at Daytona, at Talladega. He's been in the front and in conversation at the front at super speedways in the Cup Series as well. There's a maturity that needs to be gained in terms of when to make moves and stuff like that. But I think also leaning into that, last year in the regular season finale, he was the one to make the wreck, somebody that needed to win to get into the playoffs versus the guys who were eligible to point their way into the playoffs didn't create the wrecks. Looking at Matt Davidetto, looking at William Byron, who won the race, and Jimmy Johnson, who got caught up in a wreck. So for myself, looking at that and how it played out last year, I would stay away more from the drivers that are in that must-win scenario versus Redick and Dillon, who are in that more point situation. I think they're less risky than some of the other ones. And for Austin Dillon, he showed very, very well at the 500. He's been a contender many, many times at Daytona and more broadly super speedways. If he just does his thing, which is being up in the conversation, being at the front, and being there at the end, I really don't see why he should do anything different than he normally does. This isn't a situation where somebody that all of a sudden is put into this awkward situation. He's somebody that has had the pressure at Daytona before. He's been in the conversation before. I know this is a different kind of situation that maybe he's used to with the must-win scenario and stuff like that. But I'm much higher on Austin Dillon's fantasy prospects than you are this weekend.
Fair enough. That's why we do this show. Love to have the debate. Love to hear from both sides of the story sometimes. But yeah, I think it's a flip a coin if you really want to. You can. It's just a matter of opinion. I just personally think that Dillon is a stay away from this weekend. It's just a bit too risky for my liking, but you could definitely feel the opposite way and lean more toward Kyle's side and think that he was almost an option for your lineup, or even put him in your lineup this weekend. I think he can get you some solid points and get you a fantasy victory at the end of the day if you're doing a head-to-head like myself and Kyle.
What I'll say finally on it is if you had Michael McDowell in your lineup, I would have had Austin Dillon in mine.
Okay. Fair enough. But that's why we love Daytona, isn't it? Anybody could go out there and win the damn thing. But let's get to the bonus picks now, Kyle. Who leads us off for this one? You do. Yeah. With
I
top
had
Chevrolet
last pick, so yeah, I go first for top Chevrolet. And this is one of the more difficult ones because there's a lot of different options available. You've got some drivers for some more mid-pack teams that are very strong super speedway racers. You've got the Hendrick power at the front. I'm probably going to be wrong with this one because he's finished inside the top 10 in the last 2 Daytona races, but I'm going to take the swing on him and put Chase Elliott as my top Chevrolet. He's been there at the finish the last couple of races at Daytona. I like his overall prospects as a super speedway racer. He has nothing to really gamble for in terms of stage points or anything like that. And I like the Hendrick power, so I'll use him as my top Chevrolet here and see how things break out.
Okay. For me, I'm going to go with William Byron. I think that I just think he's a little bit more of a better bet, in my opinion, than Chase Elliott for super speedways. I do like the 24 car just that tad bit more. I don't know why. It's just personal preference, I guess, but I'm going to lean William Byron. But at the end of the day, it's probably going to be somebody at the back of the pack, like a Corey Lejoy, that's going to be the top Chevrolet, just because of how this all works out with the wrecks. But I'll go with the bigger name rather than not for this case, and I'll say that William Byron is the top Chevrolet. I think this is the hardest one now. Top Ford. There's a lot, and I mean a lot, of different guys that could go out here and potentially win this race. You could definitely see the race winner come from this manufacturer. I do jinx him a lot, and with this category, and it probably will end up biting me in the butt. But this guy is one of the best in super speedways, specifically in the Ford camp. I'm going to go with Ryan Blaney. I'm going to go with Ryan Blaney to win the top 4 this weekend.
Well, then I'll take Joey Logano, because when you don't take him, he finishes well. And when you do take him, something bad happens. So Didn't have the option of having him in my lineup. So I'll put him in as the top 4 and kind of cover my bases there.
Fair enough. All righty. Top Toyota.
This is a bit of a difficult one because when I look at the Toyota camp, obviously you've got Denny Hamlin there. But other than him, Don't love Martin Truex Jr., even though he was in the conversation at the end of the previous season, regular season finale.
Yeah.
Obviously don't love Kyle Busch for many of the reasons that you've already stated. Christopher Bell is a bit of a wild card. And then you've got Bubba Wallace, who's kind of make or break. So I'll go, because I have the first pick here, I will take Denny Hamlin, hoping that you'll go other than that, but I didn't also want to take somebody else and take a swing and then leave you Denny Hamlin as an option for yourself. So that's who I'm going with for top Toyota.
I'm going with Denny Hamlin as well.
Okay.
Not having him in my lineup, I just want to try and cover my basis on that. I think he's going to be up there in contention for the victory, his first victory of the season. This is a really good chance for him to get that. But yeah, when I look at the options, he's clear cut away from his competition with top Toyota. At least Bubba Wallace for sure is definitely right up there. If Kyle Busch could actually finish a super speedway race, I think he's an interesting kind of play, but Denny Hamlin is absolutely the favorite in terms of leading the Toyota camp this weekend at Daytona. Winning manufacturer.
Just quickly before we get to that, I do want to look at the last two Daytona races and who ended up being the top finishers, just because it is interesting to look at, because a lot of us think about it and then maybe go to some more underrated guys or stuff. But looking at the last couple, it is interesting to see how it breaks out. So obviously top Ford for the 500 was Michael McDowell. He won the race. Top Chevy was Chase Elliott, and top Toyota was Denny Hamlin. Looking to last year's season finale, William Byron, of course, top Chevrolet, winning the race. Denny Hamlin, top Toyota. And then top Ford was Ryan Blaney. So even with the chaos that is super speedway races, a lot of the time it ends up being those higher end guys that you would normally pick for the top finishers are still the ones that usually end up getting those positions.
Yeah, there's usually about 4 or 5 that squeak through the big wrecks, and they are kind of at the front, and then there's a whole bunch of mishmash behind them that have kind of avoided the wreck. But hopefully we have combined with our lineups that we have some guys that are on the good side of that and are at the actual finish of the race on Saturday night. But winning manufacturer for this one, for me, it's pretty simple. I'm going with Ford. I just can't bet against them on the super speedways right now. They're really, really good. They have the Penske cars that I'm pretty high on at Daytona and super speedways entirely. They have some interesting names in the Ford camp with Michael McDowell, these kind of lesser or lower teams that can get some results here. And of course, McDowell won the 500. So there's Eric Almirola is an interesting super speedway racer as well at times. So there's a lot of different names in that Ford camp that I could lean more as race favorites, more so than the Chevy camp. I would never go Toyota really for this one because it limits my options too thin for a super speedway race, in my opinion, at least. But yeah, Ford is the winning manufacturer for me.
Find that one a bit interesting because for myself, I'm going Chevrolet and I'm just playing the numbers game for this one. When I look at Hendrick, when I look at Chip Ganassi, when I look at RCR, when I look at JTG, there's so many different teams for Chevrolet that have either good super speedway packages or strong super speedway drivers. I like the potential and numbers game of the organizations there. Going a bit more specific for the organization, of course, because you only get up to 4 different cars to pick from if you do go with a 4-team organization. But playing the numbers game for manufacturer, I obviously Ford is a strong bet because of the high end, and they do have some of that mid pack. But Chevrolet just has so many decent options for top 5, top 10 finishes that can go up there and get that win potentially. Felt pretty safe in that bet for myself going with Chevrolet as the manufacturer.
Strategic wise, I think Ford plays it the best though. I think when they pit, they are very much organized. I think they're the most organized group of the bunch. They get what the deal is. They know what they're supposed to do. They know their role. They know when to pit. They know how to come on and off a pit road. That's a huge part of the green flag cycles. If we do end up getting that on Saturday night, it's just a lot of different things that Ford does perfectly on these super speedways that I think Toyotas are definitely the worst at that part of it. Chevrolet is good at times, but they're kind of unorganized at the same time as well. I think Ford is the most complete with that, and they work together. We've seen the Ford lines work in terms of getting to the front more so than a Chevrolet or a Toyota for sure, just based off of also numbers. But I also think that they're the best strategists when it comes to playing the draft and knowing when the time is right to go to the front. But that's just my personal opinion, at least.
And that's fair. But what I'll say to counter that is at the 500, even though McDowell was the winner, 7 of the 10 top 10 finishers were Chevrolets, 2 of those coming in the top 3. Last year's season finale, 5 of the top 10 were Chevrolets, and 2 of those were the top 2 finishers. So it is definitely the high end there in Ford, but I think a lot of that relies on Penske being there. And if there's any kind of wreck there, I don't really love I don't really love Ford's chances as much for top manufacturer.
Okay, fair enough. Winning organization. I think you lead us off with this one.
I do. Top organization. And as I say all of that, I take Team Penske for organization, just because they're the ones at the front throughout much of these races. If things do go as planned, they're there at the finish. We saw it at the 500. They should have been the winners of that race had they not thrown a stupid block, and then all the chaos happens after that.
Yeah.
So because of that, looking at Ryan Blaney being in the conversation as well, which he wasn't for the 500 because of that early wreck. I like also splitting it between taking Chevrolets for the manufacturers and Penske for the organization, kind of mix things up a little bit and hope to hit on something there for the 10 points. But Penske, I think overall, it's a toss up between them and Hendrick for myself, but looking at the options available, Penske, I think, has 3 very, very strong drivers there. And I think all of them have realistic shots to win. So I'll mix it up a little bit, go Chevrolet for the manufacturer, and then Penske for organization.
I'm also going Penske for the organization.
Wow, doubling down.
Yeah.
Wow.
I do really like what they are going to bring to the table this weekend. They've just impressed me since basically like the 2010s have started, that they are the dominant force of the super speedways. So specifically when Brad Keselowski came over back in 2012, I think back in 2011, but then into the 2012 season, we really saw
We're going way back, man. I don't know.
I know, but I've really seen them as the most consistent force on the super speedways, at least in my opinion.
2018, they only have 1 win at Daytona.
Yep, fair enough. But I still just...
So I don't know about the consistency there. That's all I'll say.
I think that they put themselves in the best position to win. Sometimes they just get wrecked. That's just the nature of the beast. Like it's just difficult to win at Daytona.
What I'll say is, if they're putting themselves in the best position to win, why do they only have 1 over the last 3 years? That's kind of the... I just being at the front isn't necessarily the best position.
Well, I mean, it's really difficult to find that perfect position at Daytona. Nobody knows what really that perfect position is. I don't think there's one spot where you want to be that you're going to be like, yeah, that's guaranteed, right? I don't think that that's what you're saying either, but it's just, I think part of it comes down to them only having 3 cars compared to the rest of them having 4 as well. So just that little bit of a deficit in the overall number scheme prevents them from maybe having that better shot. I was
just talking about Ford in general. If we're going to Penske, then the last time they won at Daytona was 2016.
Yeah. Okay. It's been a while, but I think they can get it done this weekend.
I get what you're saying. I just think that you're maybe a bit too high on Penske, just because they do get the stage points and are at the front, but aren't necessarily as much there at the end. Obviously, the 500, they were there and should have. They still got the Ford win overall, but past that, Chevrolet with Byron and regular season finale 2020 Daytona 500, Toyota and Hamlin. Before that, we'll remove the Haley Chevrolet one because that one was a fluke. But before that, Denny Hamlin Toyota again, Eric Jones Toyota, and then Austin Dillon Chevrolet. So it has been a little while. And even before that, the 2 Ford victories before that were Roush with Stenhouse and then Stuart Haas with Kurt Busch as well. So
yeah, the numbers are there. I'm not disputing the numbers. When I think about it, and I just think Penske is my team this weekend for winning organization, as is for you. I think that they're really, really solid. Yeah. But
they've got the high end potential, but the consistency in the performances over the past few years in terms of finish maybe haven't been there to that same extent as they should be.
Yeah, I can agree with that. But Xfinity Series winter time. We'll get into the winner picks here. Only 2 this time around, but Xfinity Series, I go first for this one, and then you go first for the Cup Series. But
really glad I get that first Cup Series pick.
Yeah,
it's a big benefit this weekend.
Yeah. For Xfinity Series this weekend, it's a crapshoot. It's Daytona under the lights tonight. I'm going to say that Brett Moffitt wins tonight at Daytona.
Okay.
Just for fun, just for, why not? Like, why wouldn't I just pick Brett Moffitt? It's the guy that we've been harping on the whole season. It's been the Brett Moffitt and Daniel Hemrick show in the Xfinity Series in terms of our debates. I'm going to go with Brett Moffitt and his best shot probably to win an Xfinity Series race this season. So let's say the O2 punches his ticket to the playoffs.
I will go. Do I want to? Yeah, No, okay. I was going to go Justin Haley, but that one's too straightforward. So I'll go slightly different with it. I'll say AJ Allmendinger continues the hot run of form and gets redemption for last year's finish.
Okay, fair enough. At least there's a bit of a redemption arc in that one. I was looking at Haley, but Colleague has just been a little bit off on the super speedway pace, it seems, this season. I don't know if that's just me, but in the five,
they won one of them and then the other one was Daytona. So,
yeah, I know.
And they had two of the top 5 finishers. So I don't know about that, but
I thought in the Daytona race, they were a little bit underwhelming, at least compared to what I thought they were going to be. But Cup Series, who do you think is going to bring it home in the regular season finale? Of course, when we did our preseason episode, you predicted Bubba Wallace to win this race here, to punch his ticket to the playoffs. Are you going to follow it up here?
I want you to guess who I'm going with.
Why would I do that?
Because I want to see what direction you think I'm going in.
I think you're an honest guy. You've done it a little bit earlier on this season. I'm going to say you pick Bubba Wallace to win this race because you don't know what else to pick. I'm going to say Bubba Wallace. You pick him.
You're absolutely correct. It's Bubba Wallace. I went with it with Matt DiBenedetto at Talladega earlier in the preseason show. I said that DiBenedetto doing our kind of different or surprise winner picks. I said DiBenedetto. Yeah. Well, no, surprise winner pick as well.
Okay.
Because I said Chris Buescher. Yeah, Chris Buescher would get Talladega win in the playoffs, and technically he's not a first-time winner. But anyways, in the kind of first-time winner, surprise winner realm, I said DiBenedetto at Talladega. I didn't put him in my lineup. He had a very strong run. Probably should have won that race had he blocked the correct lane at the end of that race. Bubba Wallace, same situation here. At the beginning of the year, I said it would be the storybook season finale. They're close throughout the season, need a win to get into the playoffs, and they get it at the season finale. So screw it. I got to stick with it if it happens. Bubba Wallace is your Cup Series winner in the regular season finale at Daytona.
I mean, what a story it would be. I mean, that would basically what NASCAR would be absolutely dying for if it happened here tomorrow night. But I figured you probably would be picking Bubba Wallace. So I do find it interesting your spread, Chevrolet, Penske, and then a Toyota to win.
It was intentional.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. Cover your bases. I as well am going to be covering my bases. I'm not going to go all in on Team Penske. I think that's a bit foolish on my end. I'm going to say Denny Hamlin wins tomorrow night.
Oh, you're boring.
Yep.
Come on.
I'm saying Denny
Really?
Hamlin. Yep.
That's disappointing.
I have to try and beat you. Okay. You got to understand how long those 12 weeks were for me. All right. I have to try and get some wins back in the column. I have to. I can't go with a shock winner. It's a first time winner this season, at least. So I'll say that Denny Hamlin gets it done. And
what a cop-out answer. Denny Hamlin at Daytona. What a guy.
I picked Logano for the 500. So hopefully it doesn't end up the same way where Hamlin's wrecked into turn 3 on the final lap.
Disappointing. Okay, I don't got much to add on that.
What do you want me to do, man? I got to try and win a fantasy week here.
It's Daytona. So, have some fun with the winner pick. We know we're going to be wrong anyways.
Yeah, I did have some fun with it. Hopefully it does pay off. I had a lot of fun picking Denny Hamlin there, just for your information. But any final thoughts before we wrap up the regular? Oh, yes. Do we think Austin Dillon works his way into the playoffs? Let's just say that Bubba Wallace doesn't win and there's no new winner. Is there a situation where Austin Dillon can point his way in for Tyler Redick? Okay.
No, there's too much ground to make up. He'd need to win both stages, which is unrealistic to expect given the chaos, and then still needs to beat him by 5 positions. So, no, I don't see a realistic scenario where he can point his way in unless there's an early wreck and Redick wrecks out early. That's the only way that's possible. And I don't think Redick will put himself in that situation. So no, I don't think it's very realistic whatsoever.
So with that pick, you do think Bubba Wallace then makes the playoffs technically, or are you just having some fun with it?
I'm just mainly having fun with it. But if I were to do a power ranking, Bubba Wallace would be in my top 5 of guys to make the playoffs potentially. But no, I wouldn't have him as my leading candidate.
Okay. I think it's probably better to go safe than sorry on this end with saying Tyler Redick does stay in that spot. We'll see what happens though. We saw lots of fireworks last season, Jimmy Johnson, Matt Davidetto, and William Byron for those final couple of spots. It was an intense battle the entire race. We don't have as many options this time around for that final playoff spot, of those final couple playoff spots only being one this time around, but should be an interesting battle. Hopefully they're there near the end of the race. I would like to see if it's close or not.
I wouldn't put too much expectation into it. Just because last year the points were close enough to where each position mattered for the points. And you had 3 drivers in conversation for 2 spots versus this year where you've got a 25-point gap. It's only 2 guys. I think the focus is going to be much more on a new winner versus the 2 guys that are in the playoff bubble.
Yep, I can agree with that. But looking forward to it. It's going to be a fun race. Going to be a lot of pressure on these guys. Hopefully they can live up to that and give us a good show, as I'm sure that they will, under the lights Saturday night at Daytona. Who wouldn't want it any other way? I can't think of anybody. This is going to be a spectacular run to the checkered flag here tomorrow night, and we'll see who comes out on top. But make sure to follow us on Instagram at The Green Flag Pod, as well as Twitter at The Green Flag Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. We'd really, really appreciate it. All the links to our social channels will be in the description of the video itself. But it's been fun. We're looking forward to being back in Toronto here for the foreseeable future to bring you up to date on anything that happens in the world of motorsports as the seasons wind down for NASCAR, Formula One, and IndyCar. But for this episode, I've been Lukas Wacker. He's been Kyle Cushman, signing off for now. We will talk to you next week to give you our 2021 playoff predictions for the NASCAR Cup Series. Going to be a fun one, so stay tuned for that. Enjoy the racing this weekend at Daytona, everybody.